nowadays. So you say that the starting point is that it doesn't apply at all. You add on to that the heter of selling the land, so that would apply as well. So let me read it. Let's read it inside. He says like this. He says, "Ladad rova poskim rishonim v'achronim mitzvat hashvit bizman hazeh midivrei chachamim." According to most poskim, nowadays the mitzvah of Shemittah is midrabanan. מפני שמהתורה רק בעת שכל ישראל יושבים על אדמתם כתיקונם, כל שבט ושבט במקומו. According to most poskim, from the Torah, it's only when the entire Jewish people, the majority of the Jewish people, are living in the land of Israel, all the shvatim in their places. So then tzarech lakim mitzvat hayovel v'ashvit. That's when the mitzvah of yovel and shvit would apply on a Torah level. לפיכך, מעת שבני ראובן וגד וחצי המנשה הוגלו מן ההחלטה על ידי מלך אשור. He says, therefore, based on that, already from the time that the 2.5 tribes were exiled, the first 2.5 tribes were exiled, but la mitzvah me'at Torah, we no longer have the mitzvah on a Doraita level. Like when the majority of the Jewish people, again, will be living here, then and then the land will be divided up again into shvatim, etc. Then the chovah, the obligation, the Torah obligation of shvit and yovel will return. Okay, without getting into the technicalities of that. Then he says, there are those amongst the Rishonim who hold that nowadays it is a Doraita obligation as well. There is a third opinion in the Rishonim. There is such an opinion that nowadays, we said the majority would say nowadays it's Rabbanan. There's a minority that says still Doraita, and there's another minority that says actually nowadays there is no obligation at all, that it's a midat chasidut. It reminds us of, we have other mitzvot like this. For example, maser ksafim. Very interesting. People always ask questions about maser ksafim, how much of your income you have to set aside for tzedakah and different things. So there as well, we have a three-way machloket in the Rishonim regarding the obligation of maser ksafim. There are those who say the obligation to tithe a tenth of your income, right, to tzedakah. There are those who say that it is a chiyuv d'oraita. There are those who say it is a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, and there are those who say that it's a minhag or a midat chasidut or such. That over there, most of the poskim probably will hold that it's a minhag or that it's a midat chasidut. And therefore, when we have certain questions about maser, lots of very interesting questions that come up. For example, when we say that a person has to give a tenth of their income, do we mean a tenth of the income before tax, after tax? We include expense, but also all sorts of questions. And sometimes when somebody, especially when these questions come up, somebody who's struggling a little bit with their income, and it's very, very difficult to set aside 10%. So we say we take into account the idea that it's not necessarily a chiyuv, so to speak. Nowadays, it's just a minhag, and therefore we can add that into to be lenient. But here too, we have this three-way machloket nowadays. Meaning it's not a three-way machloket whether shvit is a mitzvah from the Torah. Not shvit is a mitzvah from the Torah. That's clear. That's what our parasha says. Question is nowadays, because of circumstances. So there are those who say that nowadays, since after the Churban and the situation we're in today, that there is just a midat chasidut to keep shvit. So that is one opinion that we bear in mind as well. And then he says like this, b'nosaf lekach, additionally, gam legabe zman hashvit nechalaku al rishonim. So a famous machloket about the calendar, how do we count the years, and how do we know when the Shemitah year is? Okay, and there are different opinions as to exactly when the count starts and when the count stops, and how we get to the 7th year. One of the arguments is, one of the machlokot, is that when it comes to counting the yovel, right, so when we're counting Shemitah and yovel, everybody holds, we don't keep yovel nowadays. But when is the yovel year? So you count 7 times 7 is 49, 7 sets of Shemitah, and then after the 49th year, the 50th year is the yovel, right? And then you start counting again. So the question is, is the 50th year also going to be the first year, or is the 51st year going to be the first year? Especially in a time where we don't have the yovel. So then do we say that 50th year doesn't count? We don't include it. So exactly how we count. So we have different shitot. We have different opinions as to how we count when the Shemitah is. So we follow a certain cycle where we hold the Shemitah is nowadays. But there are at least 3 different opinions on this. So he says, "Av she'itkaber b'Yisrael linhog gedat hageonim u'shnat hashvit." Well, the last one was in Tafshin Ayin Hey. Mikol makom Miklal safek lo yatzanu. So we at least have a safek. We have a doubt on this question. Now, we don't generally relate it that when we count the Shemitah and when we count the 7 years is going to be an nafkamina, not just for Shemitah itself, but it's going to be an nafkamina for all the Trumot and Maasrot that we separate because we have a 7-year cycle. In the Shemitah year, right, there are no Trumot and Maasrot. All the perot are hefker. But we have a 7-year cycle, and what do we do with? So we have Truma, we have Maser Rishon, and then we have Maser Sheni or Maser Ani, depending on which year we're in. Year 1, 2, 4, and 5 is Maser Sheni. Year 3 and 6 is Maser Ani. So we separate Maser. So then we say a bracha. So how can we say a bracha if we're not sure actually if it's the right year? So we relate to it. We relate to it there. We don't relate to it as a safek. But he says nonetheless there is still an element of safek regarding this. And so therefore he says nimtza. Shemeikal adin. He says if we add all these things together, right, and then we're going to say that the heter mechira comes to add another layer on top of this. So when you add, you take into consideration that number one, we have a doubt whether we have to keep Shemitah nowadays at all. Number two, we have a doubt even if we say that we have to keep it midrabanan. When do we keep it? Maybe it's the wrong year. So maybe the year that we keep it is not the Shemitah year at all. So based on those factors, you could say that in a shatat chak and the very extenuating circumstances, we could say to the chaklaim, okay, you don't have to keep Shemitah. Liftor otam legamre mechovat hashvita b'shvit. Sheken yadua shekasha dochak gadol meod afilu b'mitzvah me'atorah nitan lismoch al da'at yachid shemekenu. Okay, it's getting into the klalei psika and getting into the principles, but he says that when we have a very great extenuating circumstances, so that's when we can take into account even minority opinions and the like. So that would be the case. He says it might be the case even by mitzvah d'oraita, certainly by a mitzvah d'rabanan, and we have these sveikot which we can join together, and then based on those sveikot, now we come along. So we have like we said, number one, maybe there is no Shemitah nowadays. Number two, maybe it's not when we think it is. So therefore, again, it's not a Shemitah year. And on top of that, we add on the heter mechira. So he says, "Oel v'yesh efsharut la'atir et ha'avodah b'sadot el yedei mechira legoy sheladat harbe poskim mafkiat chovat hashvit." I think I mentioned before that in itself is one of the machlokot as well, whether selling it to a non-Jew would actually would remove the obligation. But in any event, all these factors together, based on that, that is those who allow the heter mechira. That is some of the factors that it's based on. Now he goes on to say that according to that, once we are relying on it, those who are relying on it, so you should be able to say there is no obligation of Shemitah on this particular land that has been sold. So therefore, all the work that's going to be done, the planting and plowing and whatever, you should be able to say that everything can be done normally and everything can be done by Jews themselves because there's no obligation on this land. However, he says, as far as Rav Kook, who was one of the early proponents of the, and he wrote a whole book about it, Shabbat Haaretz, explaining what the heter is based on and why it should work. So he was, in a sense, he was stringent that even after the mechira, that a Jew should not be able to do all the malachot on the land. He said only the malachot whose foundation is midrabanan, meaning those malachot that are prohibited completely from the Torah, Zriyah, Zmira, Ktsira, B'tzira, Charisha, right? Those ones, he said, should still be done by non-Jews, even after the heter mechira, so that the mitzvah should not be completely forgotten, and it should still be a zecher to the Shemitah. As we said yesterday, I'll just end with this, that those who signed gave the original heter said, every 7 years, this is not a blanket thing, every Shemitah that comes along, one has to look and one has to re-examine it, and one has to see if the circumstances really require it, both for the individual farmer and on the national level, and based on that we can decide. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash אומר, שהקדוש ברוך הוא לזכות את ישראל, לפיכך הוא בא להם תורה מצוות, 12 בעצם הנצחו יגדיר תורה